The boardroom smelled like money and silence. Marie Ayres had cleaned enough high-rise offices to recognize the difference between wealth and wealth. This room sat on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that overlooked the harbor, and every surface gleamed with the kind of care that required people like her to exist invisibly. She pushed her cleaning cart along the far wall, yellow rubber gloves bright against the polished mahogany table. 8 men in tailored suits sat perfectly still, arranged like chess pieces around a contract that had been spread across the center with almost ceremonial precision. At the head of the table, Antonino Zito held a fountain pen between his fingers. Marie had never been introduced to him. She'd been told his name once by the building supervisor, quietly, like saying it too loud might summon something, and instructed never to speak unless spoken to when cleaning the executive floors. She'd seen him twice before. Both times he'd been alone in this room, reading documents with the kind of focus that made the air feel heavier. He didn't look like the men in movies who shouted and threw glasses. He looked like someone who signed papers and ruined lives without raising his voice. Marie wiped the edge of the table slowly, her microfiber cloth whispering across glass inserts. She kept her head down. That was the trick to surviving rooms like this. Make yourself furniture. But her brain didn't cooperate. It never did. Hello, beautiful people. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. She'd cleaned this boardroom every Thursday for 6 months. She knew the routine. Contracts came out Wednesday afternoon, sat overnight for review, and were signed Friday morning. This was Thursday. The deal was early. Marie's eyes flicked to the document. $50 million. Controlling interest in a shipping corporation. The words irrevocable transfer of authority were printed in bold halfway down the page. One of the men across the table cleared his throat. Another adjusted his cufflinks. A third stared at the window like he was memorizing an escape route. Marie's pulse ticked up. Something was wrong. She moved to the next section of table, closer now, her cartwheels silent on thick carpet. Her gloves touched the surface near the edge of the contract, and she let her gaze skim the fine print. There, Section 14C, amended, Row 2, 17 a.m. She'd cleaned this room last night at 11. The contract had been locked in the cabinet then, same as always. Someone had pulled it back out after she left and rewritten a clause in the middle of the night. Marie's stomach dropped. The amendment transferred operational authority to a secondary board, effective immediately upon signing. It stripped decision-making power from whoever signed and handed it to a committee of names she didn't recognize. This wasn't a deal. It was a coup. Antonino lowered the pen to the paper. Marie's mouth went dry. Her brain screamed at her to stay quiet, to finish wiping the table and leave like she was supposed to. She was a cleaner. She made $9 an hour and lived in a 4th-floor walk-up with a radiator that only worked on Tuesdays. This was not her problem, but her feet didn't move. And her mouth opened. She leaned in, just slightly, just enough, and whispered 3 words. You lose control. The pen slipped. It hit the table with a sound so sharp it might as well have been a gunshot. Every head in the room turned. Marie's heart stopped. Antonino Zito didn't look at the contract. He didn't look at the men around the table. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, calm in a way that made her skin prickle. He didn't blink, didn't move, just watched her with the kind of attention that made the rest of the room disappear. Marie opened her mouth to apologize, to say sorry, I didn't mean to, I'll leave. But no sound came out. Antonino set the pen down slowly, deliberately. Then he leaned back in his chair and spoke for the first time since she'd entered the room. Everyone stays seated. His voice was quiet, almost polite. It didn't matter. The command landed like a physical force. No one moved, no one breathed. Antonino's gaze stayed locked on Marie. You, he said, still quiet, still calm. You are not leaving. Marie's knees went weak. She was still holding the cloth, still wearing the yellow gloves. still standing in a room full of men who could erase her name from every record that mattered. But Antonino Zito had just claimed her attention in front of everyone, and she had no idea if she'd just saved his life or ended her own. The boardroom hadn't emptied. Antonino had made one phone call, 3 words in Italian, spoken so quietly Marie barely heard them, and 2 men in dark suits had appeared at the door. Not security guards, something else. They positioned themselves at the exits with the stillness of people who'd done this before. The executives around the table sat frozen, hands flat on the surface, eyes carefully avoiding Marie's. She stood exactly where she'd been when the pen dropped, cleaning cloth still clutched in her yellow-gloved hands like a security blanket. Her cart sat abandoned 3 feet away. She could feel sweat pooling at the base of her spine. "This is fine," she thought. "This is absolutely fine. You just interrupted a Mafia boss's $50 million deal. Perfectly normal Thursday." Antonino rose from his chair. He didn't rush, didn't speak. Just buttoned his suit jacket with the kind of precision that made Marie think of surgeons and snipers, people whose hands never shook. He walked toward her. Marie's brain screamed at her to step back, but her feet had apparently decided this was a good time to stop cooperating. She locked her knees and kept her chin up, because if she was about to die in a glass tower on a Thursday morning, she was at least going to die standing. Antonino stopped 2 feet away. Up close, he was worse, not bigger, though he had height on her, but worse in the way that mattered. He had the kind of face that didn't need to express emotion to communicate threat. Dark eyes that tracked movement the way predators tracked prey. A jaw that looked like it had been carved out of stone, and a mouth that probably hadn't smiled since 2003. He smelled like expensive cologne and control. Marie swallowed hard. "Miss Ayers," Antonino said quietly. Her stomach flipped. He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. He probably knew her social security number and her mother's maiden name, and exactly how many expired coupons were stuffed in her kitchen drawer. "Sir," she managed, "tell me what you saw. Not what you think you saw. Not what made you speak. Just a flat command delivered in a voice that didn't allow for negotiation." Marie's mouth went dry. She glanced at the men still seated at the table, all of them pretending very hard not to be listening, and then back at Antonino. "Here?" she asked. "Yes." Great. Fantastic. She was going to incriminate herself in front of an audience. Marie took a shallow breath and nodded toward the contract. Section 14C. It was amended overnight. The timestamp says 2:17 a.m. Antonino's expression didn't change. "Continue. I cleaned this room at 11 last night. The contract was locked in the cabinet. Standard procedure." Marie's voice steadied slightly as her brain kicked into the kind of focus that happened when panic had nowhere else to go. "Someone pulled it out after I left and rewrote the operational authority clause. It transfers decision-making power to a secondary board the moment you sign. You'd still own the assets, but you wouldn't control them." Silence. Antonino didn't look at the contract, didn't look at the executives, just kept his eyes on her, unblinking, as though he was running her words through some internal processor that sorted truth from lie. Finally, he turned. "Bring me the original," he said to no one in particular. One of the men at the table, gray-haired, expensive watch, the kind of lawyer who probably billed in 6-minute increments, stood slowly. "Mr. Zito, I assure you." "The original," Antonino repeated. Still quiet, still calm. The lawyer's mouth snapped shut. He reached into a leather briefcase at his feet and produced a leather portfolio, setting it on the table with hands that shook just slightly. Antonino opened it without ceremony. Marie watched his eyes move across the pages, left to right, methodical, missing nothing. She counted her heartbeats. Somewhere around 43, he stopped. His jaw tightened. It was the only indication that she'd been right. Antonino closed the portfolio and set it down with the same deliberate care he'd used for the pen. Then he looked at the gray-haired lawyer. "How long have you worked for me?" Richard. 17 years, sir? And in 17 years, have I ever signed a document without reading it first? Richard's face went pale. No, sir. Then why, Antonino said, still in that maddeningly quiet voice. Would I start now? The room inhaled collectively. Antonino turned back to Marie. You, come with me. Marie's knees buckled slightly, but she forced them straight. Where? One dark eyebrow lifted a fraction of an inch, the most expression she'd seen from him yet. Do you believe you're in a position to ask questions, Miss Ayers? Probably not, Marie admitted, but I'm asking anyway. Something flickered in his eyes, not anger, something sharper, almost like interest. He gestured toward the door. Marie glanced at her cleaning cart, then at the yellow gloves still on her hands, then at the 8 men who looked like they were attending their own funeral. Well, if I'm going to die, at least I won't have to finish my shift. She walked. Antonino fell into step beside her, not behind, not ahead, but beside, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his shoulder. One of the suited men opened the door. They stepped into a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Antonino led her to a smaller conference room 3 doors down. Glass walls, minimalist furniture, a table that looked like it had never been used for anything as pedestrian as actual work. He closed the door. They were alone. Marie's pulse hammered in her ears. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too aware of the fact that she was standing 3 feet from a man who could make her disappear without raising his voice. Antonino leaned against the table and crossed his arms. How long have you been cleaning my buildings? 6 months. And you clean this boardroom every Thursday? It wasn't a question. Marie nodded anyway. Do you make a habit of reading confidential documents? No. Marie's voice came out steadier than she expected. I make a habit of noticing when things change, dates, times, where papers are left. It's kind of automatic. Automatic, Antonino repeated, like he was testing the word. I have a good memory. Marie shrugged, trying for casual and landing somewhere near desperately trying not to look terrified. Also, I'm nosy. Occupational hazard. His mouth didn't move, but something in his eyes shifted. You realize what you saw in that room? A very expensive mistake? A coordinated betrayal? The words hung in the air like a blade. Marie swallowed. Yeah, I figured that out around the time you told everyone to stay seated. Antonino pushed off the table and took a step closer. Not threatening, just closer, closing the space between them until Marie had to tilt her head back slightly to maintain eye contact. Tell me, Miss Ayers. His voice dropped half an octave. How long have you been listening? Marie's brain finally caught up to her mouth. She'd just admitted to 6 months of passive surveillance on one of the most dangerous men in the city. She'd confessed to noticing patterns, reading documents, paying attention in a world where invisibility was the only thing keeping her alive. And Antonino Zito was looking at her like she'd just become the most interesting problem he'd had in years. Marie started. Her voice died. Because she'd just realized something worse than fear. She'd revealed too much, and he knew it. Antonino made 3 more phone calls. Marie stood near the window, yellow gloves finely removed and stuffed in her pocket, while he spoke in rapid Italian to people whose names she didn't catch. His tone never changed, never rose, never sharpened into anything resembling anger. He sounded like he was ordering coffee. But Marie watched the city below, 42 floors of glass and steel, and people who had no idea what was happening in this room and knew she was witnessing something surgical. When he ended the 3rd call, Antonino slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and turned to face her. You're staying, he said. Marie blinked. I'm sorry, what? In this building, today. You don't leave until I say otherwise. I have 3 more floors to clean. No. Antonino's voice stayed quiet, but the word landed with finality. You have 1 job now, Stay visible, stay close, and pay attention the way you've been paying attention for 6 months. Marie's stomach nodded. You're using me as bait. I'm using you as a mirror. He straightened his cuffs with the kind of precision that probably took years to perfect. Someone in that boardroom just realized their plan failed because a cleaner noticed what they didn't expect anyone to see. They're going to react. And when they do, I need to know who moves first. That's bait, Marie said flatly. That's strategy. Those are the same thing when I'm the one dangling on the hook. Something flickered in Antonino's expression. Not quite amusement, but close enough to make her pulse skip. You're not on a hook, Miss Ayers. You're under my protection. There's a difference. Is there? Marie crossed her arms, adrenaline finally catching up to fear. Because from where I'm standing, protection sounds a lot like potential collateral damage. Antonino took a step closer, then another. He moved the way glaciers moved, inevitable and unrushed, until he was near enough that Marie could see the faint scar along his jawline and count the threads in his collar. I don't lose what I protect, he said quietly. Marie's throat went dry. He wasn't touching her, wasn't threatening her, but the weight of his proximity pressed against her like a physical force, and she realized with creeping certainty that Antonino Zito didn't make promises lightly, which meant he'd just claimed responsibility for keeping her alive. Great. Fantastic. I've been adopted by a Mafia boss. What do you need me to do? Marie asked, because arguing with a man who dismantled $50 million conspiracies before lunch seemed like a poor life choice. Follow me. They returned to the boardroom. The men were still seated, still silent, still radiating the kind of tension that came from not knowing if they were witnesses or suspects. Antonino gestured toward an empty chair near the head of the table. Sit. Marie hesitated. Here. Yes. Every eye in the room tracked her as she crossed to the chair and lowered herself into leather that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She folded her hands in her lap and tried very hard to look like someone who belonged in executive meetings and not someone whose work uniform was currently stuffed in a janitorial cart 3 rooms away. Antonino remained standing. He didn't address the room, didn't explain Marie's presence. Just moved to the contract, flipped it to the amended section, and tapped the page once with his index finger. Richard, he said. The gray-haired lawyer flinched. Yes, sir. Walk me through the approval process for overnight amendments. Of course. Richard's voice cracked slightly. Any changes to contracts of this magnitude require dual authorization. My signature and... He faltered. And... Antonino prompted. Still quiet, still calm. And approval from the managing partner overseeing the transaction? Who is? Richard's hands trembled. James Voss. Every head turned toward a man 3 seats down. Early 50s, silver cufflinks, the kind of tan that came from offshore accounts and Caribbean vacations. He sat perfectly still, but Marie saw the muscle jump in his jaw. Antonino's gaze shifted. James. Antonino. Voss's voice was smooth. Too smooth, like he'd spent the last 10 minutes rehearsing this exact moment. I can explain. Can you? Antonino pulled out his phone, tapped the screen twice, and set it on the table. Because my accountant just sent me something interesting. A document appeared on the screen, banking records, transfers, dates, and amounts highlighted in red. Marie couldn't read the details from where she sat, but she didn't need to. She watched Voss's face drain of color, watched his fingers curl into fists against the table, watched the exact second he realized he'd been caught. You moved $2 million into an offshore account yesterday, Antonino said, 48 hours before this deal was scheduled to close. The account is registered to a shell corporation that shares board members with the same secondary committee listed in your amended clause. Silence. Voss opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. There's a reasonable... Stop talking, Antonino said quietly. Voss stopped. Antonino picked up his phone, scrolled briefly, then showed the screen to the two men flanking the door. They moved immediately, crossing to Voss and positioning themselves on either side of his chair. "Escort Mr. Voss to my office," Antonino said. "Ensure he's comfortable while we wait for his lawyers." "Antonino, please." Voss's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. They made me—" "I understand perfectly." Antonino's voice didn't rise, didn't harden, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You've worked for me for 12 years. I've paid you well, trusted you with access most men would kill for, and you sold that trust for $2 million and a seat at someone else's table." Voss's face went gray. "Take him," Antonino said. The suited men lifted Voss from his chair, not roughly, but with the efficiency of people who'd done this before, and walked him toward the door. Voss didn't fight, didn't argue, just went, shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him with every step. The door closed. Marie sat very still, her heart pounding so hard she thought the entire room could hear it. Antonino turned to the remaining executives. "The deal is void, the contract is shredded, and if I find out any of you knew about this—" He paused, letting the silence do the work his voice didn't need to. "You won't get lawyers." Richard nodded frantically. The others followed suit, a chorus of silent agreement that looked more like terror than cooperation. "You're dismissed," Antonino said. They left in 30 seconds flat. Marie and Antonino were alone. She exhaled slowly, her hands still folded in her lap, and looked up at him. "So, that's how you handle betrayal." "That's how I handle amateurs," Antonino corrected. He moved to the chair beside hers and sat, not at the head of the table, but beside her, close enough that his shoulder nearly brushed hers. "Professionals don't leave banking records." Marie's stomach twisted. "You think there's someone else." "I know there is." Antonino's gaze stayed on the window, watching the city sprawl below them. Voss didn't have the skill to rewrite that clause. He didn't have the access to authorize it alone. "Someone above him orchestrated this. And they're still out there." "Yes." Marie swallowed. "Which means they know I'm the reason it failed." Antonino turned his head, finally looking at her directly. "Yes." The words settled between them like a death sentence. Marie opened her mouth to ask what happened next, whether she could leave, whether she was safe, whether this was the part where he explained how witness protection worked in his world. But footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. She froze. Two voices drifted through the glass walls, low, urgent, not quite whispers, but close. "Can't just leave her walking around? Antonino's already moved her into his line of sight. We won't get close. Doesn't matter. She's a cleaner. No one will ask questions if she disappears." Marie's blood turned to ice. Antonino stood in one fluid motion, his body shifting between her and the door so fast she barely registered the movement. The voices stopped. Footsteps retreated. Marie stared at Antonino's back, her pulse roaring in her ears, and realized with sickening clarity that she'd just become more than a witness. She'd become a target. Marie didn't go home that night. Antonino made the decision with the same quiet authority he'd used to dismantle a $50 million conspiracy. 3 words to one of his men, a brief nod, and suddenly Marie's entire evening had been rearranged without her input. "You'll stay in the company apartment?" he'd said. Not asked, said. "I have a cat," Marie had replied, because apparently her brain thought now was a good time to worry about Mr. Whiskers. "Someone will feed your cat." And that had been that. The apartment was on the 38th floor of the same building, sleek, minimalist, the kind of space that looked like it had been decorated by someone who'd never experienced joy. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white leather furniture, a kitchen that had probably never seen actual cooking. Marie stood in the center of the living room, still wearing her work clothes, and tried to figure out if she'd been relocated or kidnapped. Probably both, she thought. Is there a word for luxury imprisonment? There should be a word. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. She turned to find one of Antonino's men in the doorway. Not the ones who'd escorted Voss out, but someone new, younger, less overtly threatening, but still carrying himself like he knew exactly how many ways he could break a person's arm. "Miss Ayers," he said politely. "I'm Marco. I'll be coordinating your security." Marie blinked. "My security?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm a cleaner. Not anymore." The words landed with uncomfortable finality. Marco stepped inside and set a leather folder on the glass coffee table. "Your new schedule. Mr. Zito has reassigned your duties." Marie crossed her arms. "To what?" "Professional bait?" Marco's expression didn't change. "You'll be cleaning Mr. Zito's private offices, 7th floor, executive wing, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That's not a night shift." "No, ma'am. I work nights because I'm in school during the day. Mr. Zito is aware. Your tuition has been covered for the semester. You'll attend classes as scheduled, and we'll adjust your work hours accordingly." Marie's brain stuttered. What? "Your tuition," Marco repeated patiently. "It's been handled." "I didn't ask him to." "Mr. Zito doesn't wait to be asked." Marie stared at him, her thoughts crashing into each other like bumper cars. Antonino Zito had just restructured her entire life in the span of 6 hours. New job, new apartment, new existence. And he'd done it without consulting her, without asking permission, without even pretending she had a choice. "Is there anything else you need tonight?" Marco asked. "My autonomy back?" Marie thought. "No, I'm fine." Marco nodded and left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded far too much like a lock engaging. Marie sank onto the white leather couch and dropped her face into her hands. She'd saved a Mafia boss from a corporate coup. And now she belonged to him. The 7th floor was worse. Marie reported at 9 a.m. the next morning, showered, dressed in the same work clothes she'd worn yesterday because someone had delivered her overnight bag, but apparently hadn't thought to include variety, and found herself standing outside a set of frosted glass doors labeled private. Marco appeared beside her like a well-dressed ghost. "Mr. Zito is expecting you." "Fantastic," Marie muttered. The doors opened automatically. The office beyond was exactly what she'd expected. Massive, immaculate, designed to intimidate. Antonino sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black walnut, his attention fixed on a tablet in his hands. He didn't look up. "Miss Ayers," he said, "you're 3 minutes early." Marie glanced at her phone. 8:57 a.m. "Is that a problem?" "No." Antonino set the tablet down and finally met her gaze. "It's useful information." She had no idea what to do with that. He gestured toward a smaller office visible through an interior glass wall. "Your workspace. Cleaning supplies are stocked. You'll maintain this floor only. No one else has access." Marie followed his gesture and saw what looked like a supply closet that had been upgraded to executive status, organized shelves, labeled bottles, even a small desk in the corner. "You gave me an office," she said slowly. "I gave you proximity." The correction was delivered without inflection, but Marie felt the weight of it settle in her chest. She wasn't here to clean. She was here to be seen, to exist in Antonino's line of sight, where threats couldn't reach her without going through him first. Protection that looked exactly like control. "Right," Marie said. "Proximity. Got it." She moved to the supply closet. Workspace, she corrected herself mentally, and started pulling out the basics. Microfiber cloths, glass cleaner. The kind of wood polish that probably cost more per ounce than her old paycheck. Antonino returned to his tablet. Marie cleaned. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft sound of cloth against glass and the occasional tap of Antonino's fingers on the screen. It should have been awkward, should have felt oppressive. Instead, it felt calibrated. Like Antonino had measured the exact distance between surveillance and suffocation and planted her precisely in the middle. An hour passed, then 2. Marie worked methodically, wiping down surfaces that barely needed it. Because sitting still felt dangerous and leaving felt impossible, she was hyper-aware of Antonino's presence, the way he shifted in his chair, the brief phone calls he took in Italian, the moments when his gaze lifted and tracked her movement across the room. He was always watching, not staring, not leering, just aware. The way a general might be aware of every piece on a chessboard. Around 11, Marie finished the windows and turned to find Antonino standing 3 feet away. She nearly dropped the spray bottle. Jesus! She pressed a hand to her chest. Do you practice sneaking up on people, or is it just natural talent? Natural talent, Antonino said, and Marie could have sworn she saw the ghost of amusement flicker across his face. He gestured toward his desk. Sit. Marie hesitated, then crossed to one of the leather chairs positioned in front of the walnut monolith. She sat. Antonino remained standing, leaning against the desk's edge in a way that put him slightly above her sightline. Power dynamics, she realized. He was good at them. You've been here 2 hours, Antonino said. Have you noticed anything unusual? Marie frowned. Unusual how? Patterns, people, movement. Oh, he wasn't just protecting her. He was using her. Marie's brain kicked into gear, running through the last 2 hours like footage. 3 people have walked past your door. 2 of them slowed down to look inside. 1 of them stopped completely and checked his phone before leaving. Describe him. 40-something, dark suit, no tie, expensive watch, wedding ring on his right hand instead of his left. Antonino pulled out his phone, scrolled briefly, and showed her a photo. This man? Marie leaned forward. Yeah, that's him. Antonino's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He pocketed the phone and straightened. His name is Victor Orloff. He manages the shipping contracts that were part of yesterday's deal. The deal that's now void. Yes. Marie's stomach dropped. So he's either checking to see if I'm still alive, or he's figuring out how to fix that problem. Both, Antonino said quietly. The word hung in the air like smoke. Marie swallowed hard. And you're just letting him walk around? I'm letting him think he has time. Antonino moved around the desk and sat, steepling his fingers in a gesture that looked almost casual. Men like Victor make mistakes when they believe they're safe. I need him to make one big enough that I can remove him without questions. Remove, Marie repeated. That's a nice word for it. Would you prefer a different one? I'd prefer not to be the reason you have to use any word at all. Antonino's gaze sharpened. You're not the reason, Miss Ayers. You're the catalyst. There's a difference. Not from where I'm sitting. Then let me clarify your position. Antonino leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into a register that made the hair on Marie's arms stand up. You are currently the only person in this building who has seen evidence of a coordinated attempt to dismantle my operation. That makes you valuable. It also makes you a liability to anyone still invested in that plan succeeding. Marie's throat tightened. So I'm leverage. You're protected, Antonino corrected, but only as long as you remain visible. The moment you step outside my control, you become a target I can't defend. That's not protection, Marie said quietly. That's a cage. Antonino's expression didn't change. The difference between a cage and a fortress depends entirely on which side of the bars you're standing on. He stood, buttoning his jacket with that same infuriating precision, and moved toward the door. Marie twisted in her chair. Where are you going? Antonino paused, one hand on the doorframe, and looked back at her over his shoulder. To remind Victor Orlov what real danger looks like. The door closed. Marie sat alone in the pristine office, her pulse hammering against her ribs, and realized with cold, creeping certainty that she wasn't being protected from Antonino's world. She was already inside it. And the locks had just engaged. Viktor Orlov returned to the 7th floor at 2:47 p.m. Marie knew the exact time because she'd been watching the clock, counting down the minutes since Antonino had left with that chilling promise about reminding people what danger looked like. He'd been gone for 3 hours. Marie had cleaned the same section of window 4 times. When the frosted glass doors opened, she was wiping down the conference table in the corner, a piece of furniture so pristine it clearly never hosted actual meetings. She kept her head down, cloth moving in slow circles, but her peripheral vision tracked every movement. Viktor entered first. Then Antonino, flanked by Marco and another man Marie didn't recognize. They moved with the coordinated precision of people who'd practiced entering rooms as a unit. Viktor looked worse than he had this morning. His tie was loosened, his jacket hung slightly crooked, and his eyes, when they flicked toward Marie, carried the kind of panic that came from realizing you'd miscalculated badly. "Sit," Antonino said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. Viktor sat. Antonino remained standing. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back, and stared out at the city as if Viktor wasn't worth his immediate attention. The silence stretched. Marie kept cleaning, her movements deliberately slow, her presence a quiet reminder that witnesses existed in places powerful men forgot to check. Finally, Antonino spoke. "Tell me about the shipping contracts." Viktor's throat worked. "What would you like to know?" "Everything you haven't told me yet." "Antonino, I don't understand." "Yes, you do." Antonino turned, and the movement was so controlled it looked choreographed. James Voss didn't have the technical knowledge to restructure operational authority clauses. He was a finance man. You, however... He paused. "You've spent 15 years negotiating international shipping law." Viktor's hands gripped the armrests. "I had nothing to do with... Your signature is on the metadata of the amended document." The room went silent. Marie's cloth stopped moving. Viktor's face drained of color. "That's... How did you... I have very good IT staff," Antonino said calmly. "They found your digital fingerprints embedded in the file structure. You didn't just approve the changes, Viktor. You wrote them." Viktor opened his mouth, closed it. His gaze darted toward Marco, then back to Antonino, searching for an exit that didn't exist. "I can explain," Viktor said finally. "Please do. They threatened my family." The words tumbled out in a rush. "They said if I didn't cooperate, my daughter... Christ, Antonino, she's 16. They sent me photos of her leaving school. They knew her schedule, her friends, everything." Antonino's expression didn't shift. "Who?" "I don't know names. Just instructions, encrypted messages, wire transfers to offshore accounts I didn't control." "You're lying," Viktor flinched. "I swear." "You're lying," Antonino repeated, still in that maddeningly quiet voice, because men who threaten children don't use encryption. They use fear, and fear requires a face. Marie's brain caught on something, a detail that didn't fit. She glanced at Viktor's hands, still white-knuckled on the armrests, and noticed what she hadn't before. No wedding ring. No tan line where one should have been. No photos on his phone when he'd checked it this morning outside Antonino's office. Her pulse kicked. She shouldn't speak. This wasn't her interrogation. She was furniture, useful, visible furniture that cleaned windows and stayed quiet. But her mouth opened anyway. He doesn't have a daughter. Every head in the room turned toward her. Viktor's eyes went wide. Antonino's gaze sharpened. "Continue, Miss Ayers." Marie set down the cloth, her hands suddenly unsteady. "This morning, when he stopped outside your office, he checked his phone. The lock screen was blank. No photos. Most parents use pictures of their kids." She looked at Viktor. "And you're not wearing a wedding ring. No tan line. No indent on your finger." Viktor's face went from pale to gray. "You don't have a family," Marie said quietly. "Which means you weren't protecting anyone. You were just protecting yourself." Silence crashed through the room like a physical force. Antonino moved, not fast, but with the inevitability of a landslide. He crossed to Victor's chair, leaned down, and placed both hands on the armrests, caging him in. "Last chance," Antonino said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Who gave you the instructions?" Victor's composure shattered. "Adrian Kolkov." The name landed like a gunshot. Marco's expression flickered. The first crack in his professional mask Marie had seen. Antonino straightened slowly. "Adrian Kolkov," he repeated. "The man who manages my Eastern European operations." "Yes. The man I've known for 20 years. Yes." Antonino turned away, his jaw tight, and Marie watched something dangerous slide behind his eyes. Not anger, but something colder. Calculation. "How many others?" Antonino asked. Victor's voice cracked. "I don't know. Adrian kept everyone compartmentalized. I only knew my part." "Which was?" "Legal restructuring. Make the documents look legitimate. Build a paper trail that would hold up in court if you tried to fight it." "And what was Adrian's endgame?" "He wanted control of the shipping routes, said once you signed, he'd have enough leverage to negotiate you out entirely." Victor's hands trembled. "I'm sorry. God, Antonino, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't resurrect trust," Antonino said flatly. He looked at Marco. "Put him in the West office. No phone, no computer. He doesn't speak to anyone until I decide what to do with him." Marco nodded and gestured for Victor to stand. Victor rose on shaking legs, his face the color of old newspaper. "What happens now?" Antonino didn't answer. Marie watched them leave. Victor moving like a man walking toward a cliff, Marco's hand steady on his shoulder, and felt the weight of what she'd just done settle in her stomach. She'd confirmed a traitor, exposed a lie, helped dismantle another layer of conspiracy, and Antonino Zito had listened to her. The door closed. Antonino stood at the window, his back to her, shoulders tight with restrained tension. "Thank you," he said quietly. Marie blinked. "For what?" "Seeing what I missed?" The words were simple, factual, but they carried a weight that made Marie's chest tighten. "I just noticed he wasn't wearing a ring," she said. "Most people wouldn't have looked." Antonino turned, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression was almost open, not vulnerable, never that, but present. Like he was seeing her as something more than a useful asset. "You're observant, Miss Ayers," he said. "Dangerously so." Marie's throat went dry. "Is that a compliment or a threat?" "Both." Before she could respond, Antonino's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his entire body went rigid. The shift was instantaneous, calm to lethal in the space of a heartbeat. "What?" Marie asked. Antonino's gaze lifted to hers, and the look in his eyes made her blood freeze. He turned the phone toward her. The screen showed an encrypted message thread, blocks of text, code names, transaction records. Marie's eyes skimmed the information without processing most of it, but one detail jumped out. A list of names, targets marked for removal, and there, third from the top, highlighted in red, Marie Ayers, priority, immediate. Marie's knees went weak. Her name, on a kill order, formal, official, time-stamped from 40 minutes ago. "They've marked you," Antonino said, his voice deadly quiet. Marie couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room tilted sideways, and she gripped the edge of the conference table to keep herself upright. "When?" she managed. "The moment Victor confirmed you were the one who noticed the contract amendment." Antonino pocketed the phone, his movements controlled but his eyes burning with something Marie couldn't name. "They know you're a liability, and they're moving to eliminate it." "How long do I have?" Antonino's jaw tightened. "Hours," he said. "Maybe less." Antonino made 4 phone calls in 3 minutes. Marie sat in the chair Victor had vacated, her hands folded in her lap to stop them from shaking, and watched him dismantle a kill order with the same clinical efficiency he'd used to restructure her entire life. He spoke in Italian, Russian, something that might have been Albanian. His tone never changed, never rose. He could have been ordering dinner. But Marie saw the way his knuckles went white around the phone, the tension in his shoulders, the muscle that jumped in his jaw between the second and third call. He was furious. He just refused to show it. When the fourth call ended, Antonino set the phone on his desk with deliberate care and turned to face her. "You're being moved," he said. Marie's stomach dropped. "Where?" "Somewhere they can't reach you. That's not an answer. It's the only one you need right now." Antonino crossed to a cabinet built into the wall, opened it, and pulled out what looked like a go-bag. Black leather, compact, the kind of thing that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd had to relocate someone quickly. "Marco will take you. You'll have full security. Everything you need will be provided." "For how long?" "Until I've removed the threat." Marie stood, her legs unsteady. "You mean until you've killed Adrian Kolkoff?" Antonino's expression didn't change. "I mean until the threat is neutralized." "That's the same thing." "No," Antonino said quietly. "It's not." He moved toward her, closing the distance until he was near enough that Marie could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight shadow along his jaw where he'd need to shave again in a few hours. "I don't spill blood unless there's no other option," he said. "It's messy, draws attention, creates problems that take years to bury." His gaze held hers. "What I do is worse." Marie's throat tightened. "Worse, how?" "I dismantle lives without ending them. I collapse empires without firing a shot. By the time I'm finished with Adrian Kolkoff, he'll wish I'd been merciful enough to kill him." The words were delivered without inflection, no anger, no satisfaction, just cold, factual truth. Marie believed every syllable. "How?" she asked. "His money disappears. His alliances fracture. His reputation becomes toxic. Within 48 hours, he'll be radioactive to everyone who ever protected him." Antonino's voice dropped. "And then, when he has nothing left, I'll offer him a choice: exile or exposure." "And if he chooses exposure?" "He won't." Marie swallowed. "You've done this before." "Many times." She should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the casual way Antonino described destroying a man's entire existence. But all she felt was a creeping sort of understanding. This was how power worked when it didn't announce itself. Quiet, precise, devastating. "I need to leave," Marie said suddenly. Antonino's eyes narrowed. "You're being relocated." "No, I mean leave. This building, this city, your protection." She forced the words out before her brain could stop them. "I didn't ask for any of this. I just noticed a contract. I shouldn't have said anything. I should have kept my head down and finished my shift, and you'd be dead." The words cut through her spiral like a blade. Antonino stepped closer. "If you hadn't spoken, I would have signed that contract. Adrian would have dismantled my operation from the inside, and when he was finished, every person who witnessed the signing would have been eliminated to prevent testimony." His voice stayed level. "You saved 13 lives in that room, Miss Ayers, including your own." Marie's chest ached. "I didn't want to save anyone. I just wanted to survive." "And now you will." "At what cost?" She met his gaze, her fear finally cracking into something sharper. "I don't have a life anymore. I have your apartment, your schedule, your security watching me every second. I'm not protected, Antonino. I'm owned." Silence. For 3 seconds, Antonino didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at her with an expression that Marie couldn't read. Then he stepped back. "You're right," he said quietly. Marie blinked. "What?" "You're right. I made decisions without your consent, restructured your life to fit my needs, used your presence to pressure Victor. He moved to his desk and picked up his phone. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. Marie's heart stuttered. You won't. No. But the kill order will be handled regardless of where you are. Antonino's thumb moved across the screen. I'll assign security. They'll be discreet. You won't see them, but they'll ensure you reach your destination safely. And then you're free. The word landed like a stone. Marie stared at him, searching for the catch, the hidden clause, the quiet trap that would snap shut the moment she tried to walk away. But Antonino just looked at her with that same unreadable calm, waiting. I don't understand, Marie said. Why would you let me go? Because keeping you here against your will makes me no different than the men I've spent 20 years dismantling. Antonino set the phone down. I won't force you to stay, Miss Ayers, but I won't remove protection either. Whether you're here or 1,000 miles away, you'll be watched, guarded, safe. That's still control. Yes. No hesitation, no apology. But it's the kind that lets you breathe. Marie's throat closed. She wanted to argue, wanted to call him manipulative, controlling, impossible. But the truth was worse. He was giving her exactly what she'd asked for. Freedom with a safety net she didn't have to see. It was the kindest cage she'd ever encountered. I need time to think, she said finally. Antonino nodded. You have until morning. Marie didn't sleep. The company apartment felt different now, less like imprisonment, more like limbo. She sat on the white leather couch, staring at her phone, trying to figure out where she'd even go if she left. Back to her walk-up with the broken radiator? Her night classes where professors didn't know her name? The life she'd built out of necessity and minimum wage? Or stay here in Antonino's orbit, where danger was constant but survival was guaranteed? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. You should have stayed invisible. Marie's blood went cold. Another message appeared. Unknown. Leaving won't save you, but it will make you easier to reach. Then a photo. Marie's apartment building, taken from across the street, time-stamped 20 minutes ago. Her hands started shaking. A third message. Unknown. Tell Antonino his protection ends at the property line. Outside, you're ours. Marie dropped the phone like it had burned her. She stood, crossed to the window, and looked down at the city. 42 floors of glass and lights and people who had no idea what kind of war was being waged in the spaces between legitimate business and quiet violence. Her door opened. Marie spun, heart hammering, and found Marco in the doorway. His expression was grim. Miss Ayers, he said, we have a problem. I know. Someone just... It's not the texts. Marco's jaw tightened. There's been a breach. Someone bypassed building security and accessed the parking garage. They didn't get inside, but... He paused. They left something for you. Marie's stomach dropped. What? Marco held up a clear evidence bag. Inside was a yellow rubber glove. The same kind Marie had been wearing when she whispered 3 words that stopped a $50 million deal, covered in what looked like blood. It was placed on your car, Marco said quietly, with a note. He handed her a second bag. Marie's hands trembled as she read the typed message. You noticed the wrong deal. Now we notice you. The consortium. The name meant nothing to her, but the threat was unmistakable. Marie looked up at Marco, her voice barely above a whisper. What's the consortium? Marco's expression darkened. Something bigger than Adrian Kolkov. The apartment door opened again. Antonino entered, his suit jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his expression carved from stone. He looked at the evidence bags, then at Marie. Pack your things, he said. What's happening? The threat just moved outside my immediate control. His voice was deadly quiet. Which means the rules have changed. Marie's heart pounded. To what? Antonino's eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something that looked almost like fear, not for himself, for her. "To war," he said. The consortium wasn't a name. It was a network. Shell corporations layered inside legitimate businesses, politicians who took meetings they never documented, money that moved through so many accounts it became untraceable. Antonino explained this to Marie at 4 a.m. while she sat in his private office, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, watching him work. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pace, just sat at his desk with 3 monitors displaying financial records, communication logs, and what looked like architectural blueprints of buildings she didn't recognize. "They've existed for 30 years, Antonino said, his eyes scanning data that scrolled past too quickly for Marie to follow. "Longer than my operation, larger reach, more diversified." Marie pulled the blanket tighter. "So how do you fight them?" "I don't." Antonino's fingers moved across the keyboard with surgical precision. "I make them fight each other." Over the next 6 hours, Marie watched him orchestrate a financial war without firing a single shot. He froze accounts tied to consortium-front companies, not directly, but by alerting regulatory agencies to irregularities that triggered automatic audits. He leaked communications between rival factions within the network, making it look like certain members were negotiating side deals. He repositioned his own assets to create pressure points that forced the consortium to choose between protecting their operation or protecting their members. It was like watching someone play 3-dimensional chess against opponents who didn't know they'd already been checkmated. "How long will this take?" Marie asked around noon, when Antonino finally leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. 72 hours, he said. "Maybe less if they panic." "And if they don't?" Antonino's gaze shifted to her. "They will." Marie wanted to believe him, wanted to feel safe in the certainty of his voice. But the yellow glove covered in blood kept flashing behind her eyelids, and all she could think was that wars, even quiet ones, had casualties. "I should go," she said quietly. "Where?" "Anywhere that's not here." Antonino stood crossing to the window. The city sprawled below them, oblivious, ordinary, full of people whose biggest problem today was probably traffic or a missed deadline. "Running won't help," he said. "Maybe not, but staying here makes me a target you have to defend." Marie set the blanket aside and stood. "I'm a liability, Antonino. The longer I'm in your orbit, the more leverage they have." "You're not leverage." His voice was quiet, but edged with something Marie couldn't name. "You're—" He stopped. Marie's heart kicked. "I'm what?" Antonino turned, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, his control slipped. She saw something raw in his expression, something that looked almost like fear. Then it was gone. "You're under my protection," he said. "That doesn't change because you're afraid." "I'm not afraid," Marie lied. "I'm practical. And practically speaking, I'm a cleaner who interrupted the wrong deal. I don't belong in this world." "You're already in it." "Then I'll leave it." Antonino crossed the space between them in 3 strides. He stopped close enough that Marie had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. "If you leave," he said, voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I can't protect you the way I need to." Marie's breath caught. "Maybe I don't need protection. Maybe I just need distance." "Distance won't save you from the consortium. Neither will proximity to you." The words hung between them like a blade. Antonino's jaw tightened. For a long moment he just looked at her, searching her face for something Marie wasn't sure she could give. Then his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his entire body went rigid. "What?" Marie asked. Antonino's eyes lifted to hers. "They've made a move." The move was elegant in its simplicity. The consortium had filed an emergency injunction claiming Antonino's operation was laundering money through the same shipping routes Victor had tried to restructure. They'd provided documentation, falsified, but convincing enough to trigger an immediate investigation. Antonino's accounts were frozen, his assets locked, his legitimate businesses flagged for federal review. "It's temporary," Marco explained, standing beside Antonino's desk while Marie listened from the corner. "They can't make the charges stick, but the process will take weeks to untangle." "Weeks I don't have," Antonino said quietly. "No, sir." Antonino's gaze shifted to the monitors. "Where's Adrian Kolkov?" "Still in the West office. He hasn't said a word since Victor's interrogation." "Bring him here." Marco hesitated. "Sir." "Now." Marco left. Marie stood, her pulse hammering. "What are you doing?" "Negotiating," Antonino said. "With a traitor?" "With the only person who has direct access to consortium communication channels." 10 minutes later, Adrian Kolkov walked into the office flanked by 2 of Antonino's security team. He looked worse than Victor had, unshaven, rumpled, his expensive suit wrinkled from days in confinement, but his eyes were sharp, alert, the eyes of someone who knew exactly how valuable he'd just become. "Antonino," Adrian said carefully. "Sit." Adrian sat. Antonino leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "The consortium has frozen my assets. I assume you know about this." Adrian's expression didn't change. "I might." "And I assume you have a way to communicate with them." "I might," Adrian repeated. Antonino's voice dropped. "Then you're going to deliver a message." "Why would I do that?" "Because if you don't, I'll release documentation proving you embezzled $17 million from their operation over the last 5 years. The color drained from Adrian's face. "I know." Antonino's tone was almost conversational. "I created the documentation this morning, but it will take them 6 months to prove it's false. By then, you'll be dead." Adrian's hands clenched into fists. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Antonino pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward Adrian. Marie couldn't see what was displayed, but she watched Adrian's expression crumble. "Jesus Christ," Adrian whispered. "Deliver my message," Antonino said quietly, "or I release this in 1 hour." Adrian looked like he might be sick. "What's the message?" "Tell them if they touch Marie Ayres, I burn their entire network to the ground. Not financially, not strategically, literally. Every property, every holding, every offshore account. I will make them radioactive to every government and crime syndicate from here to Moscow." Marie's breath stopped. Adrian stared at Antonino. "You'd start a war over a cleaner?" "Yes." The word was simple. Final. Absolute. Adrian swallowed hard. "They won't believe you." "Then show them this." Antonino turned his phone toward Adrian again. This time Marie saw the screen. It showed a live feed of a warehouse, massive, industrial, clearly valuable. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Then the building exploded, not in movie-style fireballs, but in controlled demolition, precisely placed charges that brought the structure down in sections, collapsing inward with mechanical efficiency. Marie's hand flew to her mouth. Adrian went white. That was a consortium distribution center." "Was," Antonino confirmed. $3 million in inventory. Gone. And I have 12 more locations queued." He pocketed the phone. "Deliver my message." Adrian stumbled to his feet, his hands shaking. "They'll kill me for this." "They'll kill you slower if you don't." Marco escorted Adrian out. The office went silent. Marie stood frozen, staring at Antonino, her mind struggling to process what she'd just witnessed. He'd destroyed a building. For her. "You just started a war," she said quietly. "I ended one," Antonino corrected. "The consortium understands leverage. Now they understand I'm willing to destroy it." "You did that for me." "Yes." Marie's chest tightened. "Why?" Antonino turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she'd met him, his control wavered. "Because losing you is not an option I'm willing to consider." The words hit like a physical force. Marie took a step back, then another. "I can't, Antonino. I can't be the reason you burn the world down." "You're not the reason. You're the catalyst." "That's the same thing." "No." He moved toward her. "The reason is that I refuse to let dangerous men dictate who I protect." Marie shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "This is too much. It's too big. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody to me." The confession hung in the air between them, raw, unguarded, terrifying. Marie's heart cracked. "I'm leaving," she whispered. "Tonight. I'll go somewhere they can't find me, somewhere you don't have to defend." Antonino's expression shuddered. "Marie, please." Her voice broke. "Please don't make this harder." For a long moment, Antonino didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at her with an expression that Marie would remember for the rest of her life. Loss, restrained behind iron control. Then he nodded once. "I'll arrange transport," he said quietly. "You'll leave at midnight." Marie turned toward the door before he could see her cry. She was 3 steps away when his voice stopped her. "Marie." She paused but didn't turn around. "If you change your mind," Antonino said, his voice barely audible, "I'll be here." Marie closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, and walked out. Marie had 2 hours before midnight. She sat in the company apartment, a single duffel bag packed beside her, and stared at the city lights bleeding through floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere down there was a life she recognized, small, ordinary, hers. Up here was something else entirely. Her phone sat on the coffee table, silent. No texts, no calls. Antonino had meant what he said. He was letting her go. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like drowning. Marie picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts out of habit. Her roommate from last year, her academic advisor, the supervisor from the cleaning company who'd fired her the moment Antonino had reassigned her duties, people who knew her as the girl who worked nights and kept her head down. Not the woman who'd stopped a $50 million coup with 3 words, not the person a Mafia boss had declared worth burning the world to protect. A soft knock pulled her from the spiral. Marie stood, her heart kicking into her throat, and opened the door. Marco stood in the hallway, but he wasn't alone. Antonino was beside him. He'd changed clothes, dark slacks, a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, no tie. He looked less like a corporate executive and more like someone who'd spent the last 2 hours working with his hands instead of a keyboard. "Mr. Zito would like a moment," Marco said carefully. Marie's pulse hammered. "I thought we said everything that needed saying." "I did," Antonino said. "You didn't." Marco retreated down the hall without another word, leaving them alone. Antonino stepped inside, and Marie closed the door behind him, her hands suddenly unsteady. He didn't sit, didn't move deeper into the apartment, just stood near the door with his hands in his pockets, watching her with that unreadable expression she'd come to recognize as his version of carefully managed emotion. "Your transport leaves in 90 minutes, he said. "I know." "Marco will drive you, personally. You'll have security at your destination. Discreet. Invisible. They won't interfere with your life." Marie crossed her arms. "You came here to confirm my travel arrangements?" "No." Antonino's jaw tightened. "I came to make you an offer." Her stomach flipped. "I don't want money." "I'm not offering money." "Then what?" Antonino pulled a folded document from his pocket and set it on the coffee table. Marie stared at it like it might detonate. "What is that?" "A contract," Antonino said. "Read it." Marie hesitated, then crossed to the table and unfolded the pages. Her eyes skimmed the legal language, dense, precise, the kind of document that had been written by someone who understood exactly how words could be weaponized. But the terms were clear. Marie Ayres would serve as strategic consultant to Antonino Zito's operations. Compensation, 6 figures annually. Benefits, full medical, housing stipend, educational funding. Duration, renewable annually at her discretion. Scope of work, observational analysis, pattern recognition, strategic insight. Marie's breath caught. She kept reading. Clause 7. Autonomy. The consultant retains full autonomy over hours, location, and engagement. No action may be compelled without explicit consent. Clause 9. Exit terms. The consultant may terminate this agreement at any time without penalty, financial or otherwise. Security provisions remain in effect regardless of employment status. Clause 12. Partnership. This agreement constitutes a professional partnership. The consultant is not an employee, subordinate, or dependent. All decisions require mutual consent. Marie set the contract down slowly and looked up at Antonino. "You're offering me a job," she said. "I'm offering you a choice. To work for you." "With me," Antonino corrected. "Not for, not under, with." Marie's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because you see things I miss. Because you think 3 steps ahead of danger without training. Because in 6 months of cleaning my boardrooms, you've conducted a more effective audit than any professional I've hired." Antonino's voice stayed level, but something burned behind his eyes. "And because I trust you more than I trust anyone in my operation." The words landed like a confession. Marie shook her head. "You barely know me? I know you stopped me from signing away my empire. I know you identified Victor's lie before I did. I know you've had multiple opportunities to betray me for money or safety, and you chose neither." He took a step closer. "I know enough." Marie's hands trembled. She shoved them in her pockets to hide it. "This contract, it's just another cage. Professional instead of personal, but still a cage." "Read Clause 7 again." Marie glanced down. "Full autonomy. No action may be compelled." "You could walk away tomorrow," Antonino said quietly. "You could take consulting jobs with my competitors. You could tell me to go to hell and mean it. The only thing I'm asking is that you consider staying, not because I've trapped you, but because you choose to." Marie's chest ached. "And if I say no?" "Then you get in Marco's car at midnight and I never contact you again." His expression didn't change, but his voice dropped. "But you'll still be protected. That doesn't end because you refuse me." "That's control," Marie said. "That's care." The distinction shattered something inside her. Marie turned away, her eyes burning. "You don't care about people, Antonino. You manage them, position them, use them when they're useful and discard them when they're not. Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I don't know what you're doing." The words burst out sharper than she intended. "You've restructured my entire life in a week. You've put me in the center of a war I didn't ask to fight. You've destroyed buildings and dismantled conspiracies and told dangerous men they'd die if they touched me. And I don't know if that's protection or possession." Antonino was silent for a long moment. Then he crossed the space between them in 2 strides, stopping close enough that Marie could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the carefully controlled chaos of a man who'd spent the last 72 hours holding an empire together with one hand and trying not to lose her with the other. "It's both," he said quietly. Marie's breath hitched. "I won't lie to you, Marie. Part of this is possession. You're valuable. You're dangerous to my enemies. You're leverage I can't afford to lose." His voice dropped. "But the other part, the part that makes me stand here at 11 p.m. offering you an exit I don't want you to take, that's something else entirely." "What?" Marie whispered. Antonino's hand lifted, not to touch her but to hover near her face, close enough that she could feel the heat of his palm. "Something I haven't allowed myself to feel in 20 years. Marie's heart stopped. He didn't say the word. didn't name it, but it hung in the air between them like a live wire. Dangerous, electric, impossible to ignore. "Sign the contract," Antonino said, his voice rough. "Don't sign it. Leave at midnight or stay until morning. I won't force your hand, Marie, but know that whatever you choose, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." He stepped back, turned toward the door. Marie's brain screamed at her to let him go, to take the exit he'd offered. To return to a life where survival didn't mean standing in the blast radius of a man who could destroy cities with 3 phone calls. But her mouth opened anyway. "What if I want different terms?" Antonino stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He turned slowly. Marie picked up the contract, her hands steadier now. "Clause 12 says all decisions require mutual consent." "Yes." "Then I want to renegotiate." Something flickered in Antonino's expression. Surprise, maybe? Or hope? "What are your terms?" he asked. Marie met his gaze. "I don't work with you. I work beside you. Equal partnership. Equal say. If I think you're wrong, I tell you. If I think a plan is reckless, I veto it. You don't own my time, my decisions, or my life." Antonino's eyes darkened. "Agreed. I'm not your employee. I'm not your asset. And I'm sure as hell not your possession." "Agreed. And if this, whatever this is between us, if it becomes something neither of us can control, we deal with it honestly. No games, no manipulation, no using power to win arguments." Antonino took a step toward her. "Agreed." Marie's pulse hammered. "Then I'll stay." The words hung in the air. Antonino exhaled slowly, and for the first time since she'd met him, Marie saw his control crack completely. Relief flooded his expression. Raw, unguarded, devastating. "On one condition," Marie added. He went still. "What?" She closed the distance between them until they were inches apart, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough to see the way his breath caught. "You stop pretending you don't feel this," Marie said quietly. Antonino's jaw tightened. "Marie, I'm not asking you to act on it. I'm asking you to stop lying about it." Her voice steadied. "Because I feel it too, and if we're going to be partners, we deal in truth." For a long moment, Antonino didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took the contract from her hands. He pulled a pen from his pocket, flipped to the signature page, and signed his name. Then he handed both to Marie. She signed beneath his name, her hand shaking slightly. When she finished, Antonino took the contract and set it on the table. Then he looked at her. "I feel it," he said quietly. "Every time you walk into a room, every time you speak, every time you look at me like I'm something more than the man who destroys things for a living." His voice dropped. "And it terrifies me more than any threat the consortium could make." Marie's breath caught. "Good," she whispered. "Now we're even." The consortium collapsed in 48 hours. Not through violence, not through bloodshed, just systematic dismantling, frozen assets, fractured alliances, leaked communications that turned members against each other until the network imploded from within. Adrian Kolkov disappeared the same day the federal investigation into Antonino's operation was quietly dropped. No charges filed. No explanations given, just paperwork that vanished as efficiently as it had appeared. Marie watched it happen from beside Antonino's desk, where she'd spent the last 2 days learning the architecture of his empire, not as a cleaner, but as someone who'd earned the right to see how power actually worked. It was terrifying. It was fascinating. It was hers now, whether she'd meant for it to be or not. On the 3rd morning after she'd signed the contract, Marco appeared in the office doorway. "The revised contracts are ready," he said. Antonino looked up from his monitor. "Which ones?" All of them. Shipping, logistics, distribution. Legal reviewed them twice. Everything's clean. Antonino's expression didn't change, but Marie saw the tension leave his shoulders. Schedule the signing for Friday. Already done. 10 a.m. boardroom. Marco left. Marie set down the financial report she'd been reviewing, a breakdown of consortium holdings that had been quietly absorbed into Antonino's operation over the last week, and crossed to the window. "You're rebuilding the deal," she said. "Yes." "The one Victor tried to sabotage." "Yes." Antonino rose and moved to stand beside her. "Except this time, every clause has been rewritten, every loophole closed, every potential betrayal anticipated and neutralized." Marie glanced at him. "Who reviewed it?" "You will." Her stomach flipped. "Me?" "You noticed the trap last time. I need you to confirm there isn't one this time." His voice was steady, but his gaze held weight. "Will you?" Marie turned to face him fully. "You're serious?" "Completely." "Antonino, I'm not a lawyer. I don't have training in—" "You have something better." He gestured toward his desk. "You see patterns. You catch details others miss. You think like someone trying to find weaknesses, not someone trying to prove competence." His expression softened fractionally. "I trust your instincts more than I trust most professionals' expertise." Marie's throat tightened. She'd spent 6 months as invisible labor, someone who cleaned rooms and overheard conversations and survived by staying beneath notice. Now Antonino Zito was asking her to review a multi-million-dollar contract because he trusted her judgment. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll read it." Friday morning arrived with the kind of precision that only happened when Antonino orchestrated it. The boardroom had been cleaned, the contracts arranged. The same glass table where Marie had whispered 3 words that changed everything now hosted a completely different deal. One built on control instead of compromise. Marie stood near the windows, dressed in clothing that had appeared in her apartment 2 days ago, tailored, professional, expensive enough to belong in this room. She'd argued briefly about accepting it before realizing that Antonino had already anticipated every objection and neutralized them. "Partnership means you look the part," he'd said, "unless you'd prefer to conduct business in yellow rubber gloves." She'd thrown a pen at him. He'd almost smiled. Now she watched executives file into the room, different faces than last time, carefully vetted, each one aware that their predecessor had been removed for betrayal. They sat in silence. Antonino entered last, Marco at his shoulder, and moved to the head of the table with the same controlled grace Marie had watched him use to dismantle empires. He didn't acknowledge her presence immediately, didn't introduce her, just opened the leather portfolio containing the contracts and began reviewing them page by page, his attention absolute. Marie stayed near the window, observing. She'd read the contracts 3 times over the last 2 days. She'd found 2 minor inconsistencies, clerical errors, not sabotage, and Antonino had corrected them immediately without question. The documents were clean, but Marie watched the executives anyway, tracking nervous gestures, eye contact, the way hands moved toward pens or away from them. 20 minutes into the review, one man, silver-haired, late 50s, the kind of lawyer who'd probably never been nervous a day in his life, shifted in his seat. Marie's attention sharpened. The man glanced toward the door, then at his watch, then at the contract in front of him. His jaw tightened. Marie's pulse kicked. She crossed to Antonino's side and leaned down, her voice barely above a whisper. Section 9B. The man across from you keeps looking at it. Antonino's gaze didn't lift from the contract. What's wrong with Section 9B? I don't know, but he's worried about it. Antonino flipped to the section in question and read silently. Marie watched his eyes move across the page, left to right, methodical, missing nothing. Then he stopped. His finger tapped the page once. Richard. Antonino said quietly. The silver-haired lawyer flinched. Yes? Section 9B grants operational oversight to an interim committee during the transition period. That's standard procedure. It wasn't in the original draft. Antonino's voice stayed level. When was it added? Richard's face went pale. There must have been a miscommunication. When? Yesterday afternoon. Your legal team requested. I have no legal team, Antonino said. I have one lawyer. And he's sitting at this table. Every eye turned to a younger man 3 seats down, early 30s, expensive suit, hands suddenly flat on the table. Thomas, Antonino said. The young lawyer's throat worked. Sir, who authorized the amendment? I received an email from your office. Show me. Thomas pulled out his phone with trembling hands, scrolled briefly, and passed it across the table. Antonino read for 5 seconds. Then he set the phone down and looked at Marco. Trace the email, he said quietly. Marco nodded and left the room. Silence crashed through the boardroom. Marie stayed beside Antonino, her heart hammering, watching the young lawyer realize he'd been used as a pawn in someone else's play. Antonino closed the contract. The signing is postponed until the source of that email is confirmed. Everyone stays seated. No one moved. Marie leaned down again. You think it's another consortium move? No. Antonino's gaze stayed on Thomas. I think it's desperation. Someone trying to salvage what's left of a collapsed operation. How do you know? Because the amendment is sloppy, rushed, the kind of mistake professionals don't make. His voice dropped. But amateurs do. Marco returned 10 minutes later. The email originated from a personal account registered to James Voss, he said. The room inhaled collectively. Antonino's expression didn't change. Voss is supposed to be in federal custody. He was released on bail 2 days ago. Legal technicality. Where is he now? Unknown. Antonino stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. Find him. And when you do, ensure he understands that bail doesn't protect him from consequences. Marco nodded and left again. Antonino turned to the executives still seated at the table. You're dismissed. The signing will be rescheduled once I've confirmed every clause is exactly as I wrote it. They left quickly. Marie and Antonino were alone. She exhaled slowly, adrenaline finally catching up to the moment. That's twice now I've interrupted your deals. Yes. You going to make it a habit to almost sign documents with hidden traps? Antonino's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Only if you're here to stop me. Marie crossed her arms. That's a terrible business strategy. It's an excellent partnership strategy. Antonino moved to the window, looking out at the city. I spent 20 years building this operation alone. Every decision mine. Every risk calculated, every outcome controlled. He paused. And in 20 years, I never once considered that having someone beside me might make me stronger instead of vulnerable. Marie's chest tightened. And now? Antonino turned to face her. Now I know better. The words settled between them, simple, factual, devastating. Marie took a step closer. So what happens next? We rewrite the contract. Again. Together this time. And then? And then I sign it. Antonino pulled the fountain pen from his jacket pocket, the same one he'd been holding when Marie whispered 3 words that changed everything. With you standing beside me, not behind, not watching from the margins, beside. Marie's throat closed. Antonino held out the pen. Marie stared at it. What are you doing? Giving you the ability to stop me if I'm wrong. His voice dropped. Or to let me continue if I'm right. Marie took the pen slowly, her fingers brushing his. The contact lasted half a second. It felt like lightning. This is insane, Marie said quietly. Yes, you're giving a former cleaner veto power over multi-million-dollar deals. I'm giving my partner the authority she's earned. Antonino's gaze held hers. Marie, You've stopped 2 conspiracies, identified 3 traitors, and restructured my entire approach to security in less than 2 weeks. You've earned more than veto power." Marie's hands trembled around the pen. "What if I make a mistake? Then we fix it together. What if I see something wrong and I'm too afraid to speak?" Antonino stepped closer, his voice quiet but absolute. "You've never been too afraid to speak. That's why you're standing here." Marie looked down at the pen, heavy, expensive, the kind of object that signed documents that changed empires. Then she looked up at Antonino. "If I do this," she said, "if I stay beside you and build this partnership and become someone who stops you from making catastrophic mistakes, yes, you have to promise me something. Name it." Marie's voice steadied. "Promise me you'll let me interrupt you again, and again, and every single time you're about to do something reckless or dangerous or stupid." Antonino's expression softened, the closest thing to vulnerability Marie had ever seen from him. "I promise," he said quietly, "on one condition." "What?" "You stay close enough to notice." Marie's heart cracked open. She handed the pen back to him, her fingers lingering against his for just a moment longer than necessary. "Deal," she whispered. Antonino took the pen, his gaze never leaving hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, Marie saw him smile, small, restrained, genuine. "Then let's build something they can't destroy," he said. Marie smiled back. "Let's." 6 months later. The boardroom looked exactly the same glass table, same floor-to-ceiling windows, same view of the city sprawling 42 floors below. But everything else had changed. Marie sat at the table, not in the corner, not near the windows, but at Antonino's right hand. Her title was printed on the contract in front of her, Strategic Partner, Zito Enterprises. Antonino held his pen poised above the signature line of a deal that would expand his shipping operation into 3 new international markets. Marie had reviewed every clause. She'd found nothing wrong. But Antonino still waited, his gaze shifting to her. "Thoughts?" he asked. Marie smiled. "Sign it." Antonino's pen touched paper, and this time, when it moved across the signature line, Marie's name appeared beside his. Equal. Partnership. Permanent. Outside the boardroom, the city continued, oblivious to the quiet war that had been waged and won in glass towers and encrypted messages and 3 words whispered at exactly the right moment. Inside, Marie looked at Antonino. He looked back, and neither of them had to say what they both knew. They'd built something impossible, and nothing, not conspiracies, not threats, not empires, could tear it down.